Hello and welcome to the AI Show, brought to you by Lenovo. I'm your host, Emily Barrett, and I'm thrilled to be your guide into the fascinating world of artificial intelligence. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the AI universe, exploring the latest innovations, the people behind them, and how these technologies are shaping our future. On this episode, I'll be joined by Dom Couldwell, who I'll be discussing the importance of data with and also a little bit about LLMs. So let's begin as we take you on your journey through the world of AI. Hi, Dom.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So do you want to just start off by introducing yourself a little bit? Who are you? What do you do? Where'd you come from?
My name's Dom Couldwell. I'm head of field engineering for Datastax across the EMEA region. I'm also in charge of our global pricing strategy for our product suite as well. Datastax, if you don't know us, we are AI platform as a service. We're aiming to give you a faster time to market when you're delivering your solutions, more relevant results for your end users as well. And we strongly believe that open source is going to be the heart of any future around AI. We have a strong heritage around Cassandra, around Pulsar, and we believe that innovation and that kind of iteration you can have in that space is going to be key to success in the future.
Yeah, and I think that, we said we were going to maybe not go into the open source thing in loads of depth here because that would probably be an entire hour and a half long conversation. But yeah, that speed of innovation thing I think is really key, especially in this market. We're seeing things continuously evolve. So do you want to just tell me a little bit more around what Datastax do? How do you guys operate, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we've had a heritage in AI for a long time. So Cassandra is a database. If you think about Uber, Netflix, Facebook's, this is one of the reasons that Cassandra came along in the first place in terms of supporting that strategy. But we've seen over time people who want to modernize their strategy around one. People kind of love and hate Cassandra at the same time. It's an amazing database, but it can be a challenge to operate. So a few years ago, we launched Astra, which is our Cassandra as a service in the cloud. What we did there really is break up the monolith that is Cassandra to give you a serverless architecture in the cloud. That's been hugely successful. And now, as we're seeing things evolve future, we thought data needs to be real time as well. So we added in Pulsar with that one as well. So the ability to stream data. So you've now got the best in class, most scalable database. You've got a great way of streaming the data, making it real time and getting it to the edge where you need it. Obviously, more recently, we've seen the huge explosion in terms of generative AI as well. So many databases have iterated, and so is the Cassandra suite. So now we have vector search in there as well, in order to do a different kind of search on our data. We have partnerships with NVIDIA as well in terms of using the LLM aspect of that one as well, partnering with people that are unstructured as well to think about how you actually process the pipeline of data in there, because in the end, there's no AI without data. Yeah. And partnering with many organizations as they're finding their way. It's a difficult time. There's lots of hype in the area, but I think now we're certainly going through a different phase of their journey where there's a bit more reality coming in. It's not all just magical unicorns in terms of Gen AI. And people want to really talk about real world use cases and with how they can really extract value out of generative AI.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, we're moving into this phase where people are no longer looking for unicorns and rainbows. People are actually looking for hard outcomes here. And people are starting to really think about what they can use AI for in their businesses today. And I always think it's really interesting talking to companies that have come from a data background into AI, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily make that link in their head between the two things. So do you maybe just want to explain a little bit about that link between data and AI, and Sure. why that matters?
And it's different for different organizations because let's take two extremes. So say you're a legacy organization with 50, 100 years of data there. That's a huge asset to you, but is that actionable? Is it accessible? So you've got this huge potential gold mine, but you've got a big challenge of actually making it accessible. Yeah. Say you're a neobank or a startup organization, you maybe don't have as much data, but that can be a benefit to you in that sense. So this kind of a little bit of a two-horse race here. So there may be a faster time to market when you have less data in terms of managing it, but there's less of a pool of data to actually use it. In terms of how you leverage that data, different organizations are tackling it in different ways. Some may use that data to train an LLM to actually be able to deliver on these results. Others may use just an open source LLM, and then they're augmenting the responses they get back. One thing we found is that people are having a little bit of a pause how they feel about LLMs as well, in terms of it's not, again, magical rainbows and unicorns. So they want to augment that data. It can be very expensive and time consuming, not only to clean your data, but then to train models to give you the results you want. So where's the compromise between training the data, fine tuning in the real time, or using techniques such as retrieval-augmented generation to actually do that in the real time as well? The benefits of those kind of techniques means you have a more close control over how the data is used. You can use real-time data alongside the data you train the LLM as well. So I think all of those different techniques require to have good quality data. In the end, you can't just put a generative AI solution on poorly managed data that you don't understand the value of. You're going to get poor results.
Yeah, I think this is the key thing for people to understand here, is that if you don't have the data, you can't do anything with a lack of data, right? All AI requires some form of data, just as having human knowledge requires some form of data. Any machine learning is the same, right? It needs data. But also that quality of that data is really important. As you say, when you've got those two different extreme ends of the spectrum with different types of organization, where you've got people who have so much data that they almost
don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. How do you start? Where do you look at first? How do I even know what data I've got? That's a conversation I'm having with a lot of people a lot of the time at the moment, is I don't actually know what data I have, because we are this large organization and we have, terabytes, petabytes of data, but we don't actually know what it is, versus I know I've got this particular problem, but I also know I don't have the data to be able to solve that. So how do I go out and then acquire that data?
Yeah.
And how do I make sure that the data I'm acquiring is actually going to be the right data to solve that problem? Data does really become the key to solving all of this.
It does. And I think people can use AI to partly solve that problem. I mean, Bub Financial is a good example. I mean, what they do is they take data from many financial organizations and they provide insights back either to the financial organization or to end users in terms of how they can better manage their money. They've had the problem for the longest time before this latest generative AI buzz curve of actually the data they're getting from a financial organization, maybe a little bit of mixed quality. So I've got two different inputs coming in. How is that from Sainsbury's? Is that from Tesco? Is that spending on Netflix? Whatever else it is, the data they get may not be hugely clean. So what they did is they had the data pumped into Cassandra, but then they used their machine learning algorithms then to clean the data first before they start putting it into the machine. So they've used AI to solve the data quality problem, to put it into AI to then give solutions to the end user. Now, you need a certain level of knowledge to do that. Super smart folks at Bud in terms of what they're doing, and they have a heritage of doing that. But you've got to solve that problem up front. AI can maybe help you with that one as well, but you've got to have the skill sets to be able to do that.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, as you say, there's answers to the problem out there. It's just making sure that you have, you're choosing the answer that's appropriate to the skill set you have available to you as well, or that you're partnering with organisations that can bring you those skill sets if you are lacking in them. I think we talk a lot about the importance of data because it is really important. And I think what we're going to start to see is those organisations who put in place good data strategies, 10, 15, whatever, however many years ago, they're going to be the ones who are going to be able to capitalise on that now, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are starting to have to do that. Right, okay, what does my data strategy look like? How do I implement that across my organisation? And do a lot of that questioning at this point of time, which is, it's worth doing at this point. So I would always say to people, if you don't have anything, look at it now. Now's a good time, because you're going to need it to be able to use.
You're going to need, and it's going to have to be flexible as well, because any strategy you put in place, again, big data is not a new problem. It's a problem we had before. People talked about a lot before. I think lots of organizations didn't solve for big data in the past. So yes, you've got to go and revisit that, but then you've got to iterate and you've got to think about how that strategy changes. Take retrieval-augmented generation again. So that's been a huge boon in terms of being able to leverage vector databases, do vector search, similarity search, do a different way of accessing your data. But as that's evolved, that's found limitations as well. So say you take the example where you're a large organization, you have lots of product manuals. You can vectorize all that data. So by that I mean, so you take your PDFs of all of your documents, you convert it into a mathematical format, which is an embedding, put it in the database. Now you can do a similarity search, say, give me things that are similar to this. If your data is very dense though, if you've got 17 copies of the product document for your latest phone, similarity search isn't going to help you there because it's going to be very difficult for them to figure out the differences. If the answer to the question actually is, well, the document's there, but inside the document there's a link to another document that has the real answer, again, this becomes very challenging. So that's when things like graph RAG come in as well. So you're taking the ideas behind graph search as well to build low fidelity graphs on this as well. So you can now navigate the data more effectively. That's something that's just come up really to the forefront of the next 6 months. In the next 6 months, there'll be something else.
Yeah.
So you can have the best data strategy in the world, but you've got to really be open to it changing and evolving. And you're going to have to make some strategic bets on who you're partnering with, saying, am I partnering with an organization that's also flexible? I can also adapt to these changes in strategy as you go forward.
Yeah, and I'd absolutely agree. We're seeing new things pop up every, 6 months, if not more frequently in this arena, right? And we've been talking about RAG for a little while now, but I still think a lot of people haven't necessarily appreciated or got their heads around what that can offer organizations in terms of their ability to do this more advanced search capability. And I think also, I'm going to talk about LLMs here, right? Because we can't talk about AI without talking about LLMs these days, which is an interesting concept to start with, the idea that the two things are quite so entwined. But I think that ability to customize LLMs to suit what you need as an organization is starting to be something that people are more focusing on now. Rather than just say, hey, look, there's a generic LLM out there that I can ask about what happened in the news last week. But to your point, if I am an organization who has a lot of technical product manuals, which, so I work for one of those organizations, we have a lot of technical product manuals, and actually being able to query those effectively is really, really, really useful to us as a business. So if you are one of those organizations, right, what would be your advice in terms of technologies you should be looking at?
Yep. So I think you step back and think about, have an honest look at your organization. What skill set do you have? I often talk to organizations about, what are you known for, but what are you actually good at? I think people have to have a long, hard look in that regard. It's okay to use an off-the-shelf LLM for some things, but then be aware of the limitations of that one. You can go the other way as well. You can do to train a model yourself, but do you want to take on the burden of training that model and maintaining the model? It's not just the training up front. You got to keep it up to date. So I always think of LLMs as super powerful, but they're like a precocious 9-year-old child that's sometimes not brilliant at keeping secrets. So if you go into it with that point of view, it's really powerful. I have a precocious 9-year-old child at home, and she's fantastic at many things, but she doesn't have that experience. So how do you augment the experience of your LLM? That's when you can use techniques like RAG to say, okay, here's the most relevant information from my organization and the most up-to-date information. Take your point about the news last week. Not every LLM is up to date on the news from last week. So you have to do that one. The final point I would say is controlling your data. So it might be highly proprietary, the information you have. And although LLMs are improving a lot in terms of, I talk about a 9-year-old child that can't keep secrets, they used to really not to be able to keep secrets.
Yeah.
Now they're getting better, and you can give it some guidance on that one. You can choose how you host it and things to improve on that one. But I think people are still fairly paranoid about that. So if you have proprietary information that you don't want to get trained into the model, but you do want to be passed as relevant context to LLM when it's giving the answers, that's again when RAG is super powerful, because you can control the data saying, okay, I'm not going to train this into the model, but I'll provide it as runtime context, and I'll put guardrails in place to make sure that that doesn't get embedded into the model as well. So you're now differentiating yourself, because ultimately data is a differentiator as well, because 10 of your competitors could also use that model. That's fine, but immediately that's flattened the competitive landscape because there's not really a differentiator there. It goes back to your data being the differentiator and how you control that data.
Yeah, and I think, it just feeds back into that. The data really matters, and having that data strategy, having that data security piece in place as well, to make sure that within your organization, people know what data they can expose or they can train on, making sure that, documents are marked with appropriate levels of confidentiality and you have appropriate access controls in place.
Exactly.
Some of this really basic stuff that sometimes isn't in place. I mean, a lot of people at the moment live by data, they provide security to their data by obscurity, because nobody knows about the SharePoint that HR have got in which they keep everybody's performance reviews. Like, no one knows what the link to that is.
Yeah.
But if as an organization you suddenly go, right, I want to train on
everything,
all of my data everywhere, and somebody somewhere is relying on this security by obscurity, actually that
you've got a big problem.
Exactly, you can have some really big problems within an organization. So again, making sure that people have appropriate access controls.
Yeah, and it's iterative. I mean, we partner with Glean and we use it internally as a product as well, and that's the conversation we had. Do we just let Glean go over everything? So what Glean does, it accesses all information and provides you a self-hosted way of querying the data. We took an iterative approach. We opened up bit by bit the different sources. Oh, you can get this from Google Drive. Here, there's some things here. There's a corporate website here. And over time, we then assess that as we're going along. As you said before, it's not a one-stop shop as well. Once you've opened up one thing there, somebody could still accidentally put something on that drive they shouldn't have put on the drive. So you've got to have checks and balances in place for that as well.
Yeah, and this all links back to that data strategy and what do you do?
Yeah.
Which is, the most important thing I think we talk about when we talk about AI.
Exactly.
So we've touched on LLMs a little bit. In terms of, I think LLMs are having a little bit of a boom moment right now. Everybody wants to talk about, I want a chatbot to do X, Y, Z. I want to train an LLM that I can use to query my technical product manuals, to whatever it is, to do agent interactions, whatever it is they want to train that LLM to do. And lots of people are very focused on that. Do you see that as being something that continues with LLMs, or do you perhaps see that there might be other things out there? Slightly leading question.
I think LLMs will always be a healthy part of the strategy, but they're being commoditized. They're now just seen as something you plug in. Previously, it was like, here's generative AI, and LLMs are 90% of it, and everything's on the periphery. Now it's saying it's a much more complicated landscape, and there's many more components, and LLM is important there, but I might just take that out and plug another one in tomorrow. So it's got to be componentized in that sense. I think people will always want to have a blend of these things together, because of the hype, and also because it's a very technology-driven innovation. You do have the cycles where you think of, well, this is an interesting technical thing, or I need to find a solution that uses, so I need to find a problem to this solution.
Yeah.
And so you get lots of very technical people getting very excited about building some technical solution and going, well, does it solve a business problem?
Yeah, what is the ROI on it?
I think we're going to have that with agentic frameworks.
Yeah.
Because that's the hype curve coming behind it. And again, that's intimately involved with LLMs, but not every agent needs to have an LLM attached to it. I've seen lots of questions where people say, okay, I'm going to use a multi-agent framework to solve this problem. So, well, why? Do you need a multi-agent framework? It's a cool idea. Everybody's seen these little demos where they say, oh, I've created a mini company. I've got one agent that's a CEO, and one's head of marketing, and one's head of field, and they're all chatting to each other, and they've got this brilliant startup pitch they've done. Okay, that's a nice science experiment. But for the problem you've got, what is the appropriate solution? And I think we've got to go down back to the first principles in terms of, okay, what is the least use case for this one? What's the minimum, the MVP for delivering this?
Yeah,
and not jump to the end just because it's cool technology and my CEO said we need more Gen AI stuff in terms of what it has. A multi-agent solution may give you some wonderful answers, but what's the cost of developing that, of maintaining that over the future? And would just a simple use of vectorized data solve for that one? Is it a single agent framework? I think we'll see this accelerate now, because although I agree with you, LLMs are going in a boom, I think the generative AI space in general is going through a little bit of, not a valley of disillusionment, there's a little bit of a reset happening there. And building on the point you said before about chatbots, people are getting a little bit tired of chatbots as well. So I think people are wanting to ask, where will the real value be from this in the future? And I've got several ideas on that.
Yeah, likewise. I think, we are starting to see, we were chatting just before we started recording about seeing people actually look at what AI as a whole has to offer, and starting to realise that generative AI is a part of this, but it is not all of this. And chatbots are part of that, but not all of that. And again, LLMs are part of that, but not all of that. And we're starting to see people actually go and move from that, I'm doing this because it's a really cool science project and because somebody says we need to be doing AI to get investors on board, versus what is the actual business value that I'm driving through doing this? What is the appropriate way to address this problem? And I think, as you say, it is really taking it back to those first principles and evaluating what is the most appropriate tool to use. Because we can all go out and, buy a power tool, but actually, if we're trying to do something really fine and fiddly, using a hand tool might be much better in that scenario, to make a slightly bizarre analogy.
Well, and CEOs, I think, are worried about that one, and they're asking more hard questions now. They've written a few fairly large checks to technologists, and if we're honest, I'm not sure if every executive really understood what they've written the check for. And it's almost become marketing budget, to your point, in terms of, okay, I've spent a load of money on Gen AI, tick. Now they're asking a lot of harder questions, where the real value is, and it's obvious. Chatbots is a great place to start with because it's a very obvious thing, but it's also kind of a false premise in some ways. If you look at the pre-Gen AI period, chatbots were fairly rubbish then.
Yeah.
But actually, they were an MVP of kinds because they were frustrating to deal with, but many organizations found, even with their relatively poor quality, they offloaded a lot of burden from their customer services teams. So they were a true MVP in that sense. And we all got frustrated with them, but actually they worked for most organizations. Doubling down on that, it says, how much investment do I want to do in a chatbot to make it better and better? And what is the return on doing that one? If it was not great, but good enough before, if I make it fantastic and I spend a lot of money on it, what have I got the real ROI? So I think people are now saying, what is the form factor of chatbots in the future? And maybe it becomes more of a user interface for more of a co-pilot, more of an iterative conversation. But I think it'll be some of the more boring back office use cases, the almost replacing RPAs kind of things, where there'll be a huge amount more value from that one, but it's not very sexy.
No, and let's face it, process automation is not something everybody wants to stand up and talk about and shout from the rooftops. I can do this automatically now. But it is actually where we're seeing a lot of business value being driven, because if you can automate a lot of those processes, it, as I say, depends on who you are as a business, what you're doing, but you can drive a lot of value from that, especially with those repetitive tasks. And I think this, comes down to that whole future of AI. Is AI going to take over the world? Or I think more realistically at this point, it's that having a tool that you can use to assist humans to offload that repetitive, potentially lower value tasks that, let's face it, people aren't very good at, because humans are not very good at those automatable repetitive tasks. Machines are better because they don't get bored and assume they know what they're doing, or switch off halfway through. And I've never done any of those things, but it happens, right? So there is a lot of value that can be had from creating those assistant type workloads to help businesses go forwards. And I think, as you've said, we're really starting to see those decision makers start to question, what is this money actually going towards? What is the actual value I'm going to drive here? What is my business actually going to get back from this?
And there's a nervousness, because if you start using AI for reg tech and you're sort of automating the way you do your tax compliance, that's a little bit scary, because that's fairly business critical stuff, but actually where there's more value. So again, we're going to have to go through a little bit of this valley of disillusionment, people saying, where is the value? We've got to build the trust that, yes, you're going to let them loose on some pretty important stuff here. But to your point, I forget who the quote was from. Do we want AI in the end, writing poetry and doing fine art, or do we want it making sandwiches and washing the dishes? At the moment, the chatbot thinks more the fine art and writing poetry, but we want it washing the dishes and making the sandwiches in the end.
Yeah, I think it's the what actually keeps us going, what actually, and don't get me wrong, there is a lot of value to poetry and fine art as well.
Yes.
But yeah, it's where you focus that as a business.
Exactly, yeah.
So thank you very much for joining us, Dom. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Well, thank you for having me.
So thank you all for joining us as well, and we hope to see you on the next episode of The AI Show.